Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Whispers at Night. Tonight, we leave behind the safety of the familiar and wander into the hidden darkness of Appalachia. Within these ancient mountains lie 10 horrifying true encounters with feral people, encounters that reveal a side of humanity most wish to deny. These accounts are not born from rumor or folklore. They come from wildlife officers, rescue crews, and lone travelers who stumbled upon things that forever scarred their understanding of the wilderness. Each story has been supported by official documents, credible witnesses, and detailed reports, creating a terrifying portrait of people who have abandoned society and embraced something savage in its place. What follows are not ghost stories or exaggerated campfire chatter. These are real events that expose how thin the barrier truly is between civilization and the primal chaos lurking just beyond the tree line. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to Whispers at Night for nightly true horror stories that dig into the darkest corners of reality. Be sure to hit the bell icon so you never miss when we reveal the shadows hiding in plain sight. Now prepare yourself as we step into forbidden Appalachian ground, where forgotten souls live without mercy, and where crossing their path might leave you haunted for the rest of your life. Elliot Harper had always been drawn to the dark places that most people avoided. A geology major at the University of Tennessee, he spent countless hours poring over old maps, mining records and geological surveys, hunting for caves that hadn't been explored in decades, or ever. His obsession wasn't just academic, it was deeply personal. The thrill of stepping into the unknown, of feeling centuries of stone press around him, was intoxicating. For months, Elliot had been planning an expedition with his two closest friends, Lena, an anthropology student with a sharp eye for human history and symbolism, and Carlos Vega, an environmental science major whose wilderness survival skills were unmatched among their peers. The three had grown inseparable over late-night study sessions and field trips, and when Elliot presented his plan to explore unmapped limestone caves in the remote hills of eastern Tennessee, neither hesitated to join. It was President's Day weekend in February 2020, and the weather was biting. Snow dusted the forest floor, and the wind whistled through skeletal trees, making the hills feel both alive and hostile. The three packed lightly but efficiently. Ropes, climbing gear, headlamps, cameras, and enough food and water for several days. As they hiked toward a deep ravine where the cave entrance was supposed to be, the terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Loose rocks shifted underfoot, twisted roots snared boots, and icy patches threatened to send them tumbling. "This is insane," Carlos muttered, stepping carefully over a jagged rock. "Elliot, are you sure this place even exists?" Elliot didn't answer immediately, his eyes scanning the steep ridges ahead. "According to the old mining records and 19th century surveys, it does. It's out here, I promise, and it's big. Bigger than anything we've seen before." Lena, carrying a small notebook and a thermal camera, adjusted her pack. "I just hope it's worth the risk. These hills are no joke." Hours passed, and the forest seemed to close around them, every sound amplified by the winter stillness. They crossed frozen streams, climbed over fallen logs, and navigated sheer rock faces with ropes. The occasional animal track reminded them that they were not alone. Shadows shifted in the trees, making them startle at every crack of a branch or distant howl of a coyote. Finally, as the sun began its slow descent, they spotted it. A dark gash in the base of the ravine, smooth limestone walls glinting faintly in the fading light. The cave entrance was enormous, 12 feet wide and 8 feet tall, and almost unnervingly perfect, like the mountain itself had carved it. A cold gust of air blew from the opening, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older, more pungent. Elliot grinned despite the chill. "There it is. Let's see what's been hiding." The first steps inside were surreal. Their headlamps pierced the darkness, revealing walls decorated with mineral streaks, flowing stalactites, and patches of delicate flowstone formations that had taken millennia to form. The ground sloped gently downward, making each step echo through the tunnel with a hollow, eerie resonance. For the first few hundred yards, it was exactly what they expected. Scientifically fascinating, untouched, and eerily quiet. Then they reached the first chamber. The size of the space took their breath away. The ceiling stretched high above, disappearing into shadows beyond the reach of their lights. But their awe turned to dread as they noticed the walls. Every surface reachable from the floor was carved with symbols and images. Crude human figures contorted in pain, animals depicted being torn apart, and abstract geometric patterns that seemed almost ritualistic. Lena's face went pale. These aren't ancient Native American petroglyphs, she whispered. Or miners' marks. They're fresh, very recent. Elliot moved closer, his camera ready. The carvings were crude but deliberate, etched with primitive tools rather than modern knives. One section of the wall appeared to be a crude calendar, tracking lunar cycles and seasonal changes. Someone's been living here long enough to mark time, Elliot murmured. Not visiting, living. Carlos's nostrils flared. And whatever lives here, it smells like hell. The air had grown rank, pungent with a smell that was more than decay. It was something organic, foul, and human adjacent. The deeper they moved into the chamber, the stronger it became. At the far end, they found the source. Crude bedding of animal hides and plant material surrounded a fire pit. Ashes were cold but recent. Scattered around were bones, some clearly deer, rabbits, or other small mammals, but others were unsettlingly delicate, humanoid in proportion. Lena's stomach churned as she stepped carefully around them. Elliot raised his camera, documenting everything. Then they heard it. A low, guttural moan from deep within the caves, almost human but distorted, rising into a wail that resonated through the limestone. It was answered by another voice, then another, until the cave itself seemed alive with the cries of beings that should not exist. Carlos grabbed his pack. "We're done. Get out now." Elliot motioned for them to stay calm. "Not yet. We need to find another route." Footsteps followed, bare but deliberate, echoing from multiple directions. Whoever, or whatever, was down here. They knew the cave's every twist and turn. Lena whispered urgently, "We should extinguish our lights." Elliot shook his head. "No, we'd be blind. They're adapted to the dark. We're not." Instead, they crawled through a narrow side passage, squeezing through tunnels barely wide enough for their bodies. Walls scraped at their skin, coated with dried mud mixed with something dark. Her handprints stretched for hundreds of feet, and deep scratch marks gouged into the limestone as though someone had been keeping track of intruders, or marking the passage of time in total darkness. The passage widened, allowing them to stand, but horror awaited them. Hanging carcasses filled the chamber, some rotting, some freshly butchered. Meat was suspended on ropes of plant fibers and human hair. Some cuts appeared deliberate and inhuman. Carlos gagged. Lena turned away to suppress her own retching. Elliot's hands shook as he filmed every detail. The sounds behind them grew, heavy breathing, scuffling feet, and something almost like laughter. They had only moments before their pursuers would reach them. Elliot spotted a narrow upward chimney, possibly a hidden exit, and led the climb. Hands and feet scraped against jagged stone, backpacks snagged on rough edges, lungs burned, muscles screamed. Finally, light filtered down from above. Sunlight. Relief. They crawled through the narrow opening and tumbled onto a steep hillside. The winter air felt like heaven. Their car sat below, waiting. But relief was short-lived. From the cave's mouth, a figure emerged. Naked, skin pale and translucent, hair matted, eyes unnervingly adapted to darkness. It released a wail, and voices from within the cave responded. Elliot realized more were preparing to emerge. There was no time. They sprinted down the hillside, sliding over loose rocks, branches lashing their faces, hearts hammering. Behind them, multiple voices called out. When Elliot glanced back, the creatures did not follow. They were bound to the shadows. Breathless and trembling, they reached their car and drove to the local sheriff's office. Their story was met with skepticism. Permits, jurisdiction, federal land regulations, excuses for why no one investigated. Elliot submitted photos and GPS coordinates to the National Park Service. Only a form letter acknowledged receipt. No one came to explore the caves. Yet the three knew the truth. People lived in the hidden cave systems of Appalachia, completely abandoned civilization, adapted to the darkness, and capable of surviving in conditions that would kill most humans within days. They were predators, alien in thought and form, masters of their underground domain. The experience left a permanent mark. Elliot, Lena, and Carlos warn anyone daring to explore unmapped caves. One misstep, one wrong turn, could lead straight into the domain of beings who had forsaken humanity entirely. The mountains have been hiding these secrets for centuries. Some are darker, stranger, and far more terrifying than anything a civilized mind could imagine. Ethan Calloway and his 15-year-old son, Mason, had made a ritual of escaping the bustle of Lexington, Kentucky every spring. For the past several years, they'd trekked into the remote headwaters of the Cumberland River, seeking solace in a father-son weekend of fishing. It was a tradition that had survived Ethan's divorce, a fragile bond strengthened over quiet streams and shared sunsets. But what awaited them that early June weekend in 2021 was far beyond the peaceful rhythm of their past trips. It was a nightmare that would haunt them for years, a chilling glimpse into the wilderness most people preferred to leave unexplored. This stretch of river was a hidden treasure, accessible only after a grueling 3-mile hike through jagged rocks, dense underbrush, and sudden drops of shale and mossy earth. It was a place where native brook trout still thrived, evading both human interference and the slow creep of ecological decay that had affected so much of Appalachia. Ethan had discovered the secret years ago, and over time, he and Mason had memorized every bend, every deep pool, and every sheltered bank where the fish lingered. The valley itself seemed almost sacred. A massive limestone bluff curved around the river, casting a permanent shadow over pools that shimmered in the afternoon sun. Towering hemlocks formed a dense canopy, filtering light into soft green hues that danced across the water. The isolation was profound. No distant hum of cars, no other anglers to compete for space. Only the quiet symphony of flowing water, bird calls, and the rustle of leaves. Ethan often described it to Mason as cathedral-like, a place where time slowed and the outside world fell away. They arrived Friday evening, carrying their packs and rods as dusk settled over the valley. Mason ran ahead, skipping along the path with youthful energy, while Ethan followed, taking in the scene. Sea of damp earth and pine. Their campsite, a flat clearing 50 yards from the river, was already familiar to them. They set up the tent, stacked firewood, and started a modest campfire, its amber glow offering both warmth and comfort. It was a perfect evening, the kind they had come to treasure, casting lines into the water, catching just enough trout for a hearty dinner, and laughing quietly over shared memories. By 10 o'clock, they had retired to their tent, anticipating an early morning of prime fishing. It was shortly after midnight when Mason shook Ethan awake, eyes wide in alarm. "Dad, down by the river, something's happening," he whispered. Ethan strained to hear, and through the thin fabric of the tent came the unmistakable sound of splashing, too forceful and irregular to be the work of fish or wildlife. It carried a rhythm, a deliberate quality, as though some unseen hand was choreographing movements in the dark water. Ethan unzipped the tent slowly, peering toward the river. The fire had dwindled to glowing embers, providing no meaningful light. Yet the sounds persisted, accompanied by faint, unfamiliar human-like vocalizations. They were words, or perhaps calls, spoken in a language neither Ethan nor Mason could identify. Compelled by both fear and curiosity, Ethan grabbed his flashlight, signaling for Mason to remain inside. He crept toward the riverbank, each step cautious against the rocky terrain, heart hammering. As he approached, the splashing became distinct, purposeful. This was no ordinary activity. Whoever, or whatever, was in the water was performing a task, deliberate and methodical, involving repeated plunges and washes. Urgent whispers and strained grunts accompanied the movement, signs of physical exertion that could not belong to innocent anglers. Hiding behind a boulder, Ethan flicked on his flashlight. What he saw made the world tilt on its axis. 3 figures stood in the shallow rapids on the opposite bank, completely naked despite the cool June air. But it wasn't their nudity that froze him. It was their actions. They were scrubbing at large chunks of organic material, pressing it against the river rocks and rinsing it in ways that suggested the cleansing of blood and other substances. Ethan's stomach churned. These were not fishermen or campers. They were processing something alive, something that spoke of recent kills, of survival rituals utterly alien to civilized life. And yet, they moved with terrifying skill, dividing labor, communicating with a strange guttural language that carried intelligence and coordination. This was not desperation. This was practice. Long, repeated, methodical, centuries of adaptation in isolation. Ethan barely noticed the movement behind him until Mason tapped his shoulder. More figures were emerging from the shadows of the trees, gliding through the underbrush with predator-like silence. Ethan's heart froze. They were surrounded. These were not isolated individuals. They were a community, feral and organized, and they did not welcome outsiders. He grabbed Mason's arm, attempting to retreat quietly, but the figures in the river detected them immediately. A sharp cry rang out, a signal, and the forest seemed to erupt with responsive calls from all directions. Ethan knew they had been spotted, and escape would be anything but simple. They ran, but the path to their tent and vehicle was blocked. Every tree, every boulder, every shadow was already occupied by hunters who moved with uncanny knowledge of the terrain. Ethan decided their only chance was to follow the river upstream, hoping for a hidden trail or some opening that might offer a route to safety. The pursuit was really endless. The feral humans moved like extensions of the forest itself, communicating in clicks, grunts, and tones that coordinated their positions and flanks. Every rock and root was familiar to them. Darkness offered no hindrance. Mason, young and fit, struggled to keep pace over jagged stones, fallen logs, and slippery moss. Ethan realized they needed to find a defensible position, a place to wait for daylight when the odds might shift in their favor. By chance, or instinct, they found a small cave tucked behind fallen boulders along the riverbank. It was just large enough for the two of them to squeeze inside. Ethan positioned himself at the entrance with the flashlight and emergency flare he carried, prepared to defend his son against an unknown threat that could appear at any moment. For hours, they crouched in silence, listening to footsteps, rustling leaves, and low vocalizations surrounding their temporary refuge. The psychological weight was almost unbearable. They were trapped by beings whose intentions were entirely unknown, but clearly hostile. Ethan observed patterns in their movement, tactical thinking, patience in a predator's patience. These weren't wild animals. They were humans who had abandoned civilization entirely, yet retained a chilling intelligence. As dawn broke, Ethan made a calculated decision. With a whistle and flare, he created enough noise and visual distraction to allow them to slip from the cave unnoticed. The morning light provided cover, and the figures hesitated to continue their pursuit openly. They moved upstream, clambering through the rugged terrain until they stumbled upon a game trail that eventually led them to the ridge and their vehicle. The detour had doubled their expected distance, but they were alive. Once in town, Ethan contacted local authorities. The sheriff's deputy listened with polite skepticism, suggesting they had encountered drug growers or other criminal activity. Ethan tried to convey the unnatural precision and ritualistic behavior he had witnessed, but without evidence, their words fell on deaf ears. 6 weeks later, the story gained grim validation. The remains of a missing hiker were found along the same stretch of river. The condition of the body suggesting scavenging animals were not the only factor in its decomposition. Primitive campsites, caches of tools, and long-term habitation evidence were discovered, but no arrests were ever made. The area remained a haunting reminder of the feral humans lurking beyond civilization's eye. Ethan and Mason never returned. They now limited their fishing trips to accessible waters, where other people provided a buffer against the unknown. Their perspective on wilderness had shifted irrevocably. The most dangerous predator might not be bear, wolf, or rattlesnake. It might be the remnants of humanity that have rejected society entirely. In the hidden hollows of Appalachia, where crystal-clear streams have flowed for thousands of years, some waters are touched by shadows of humanity that defy comprehension. And for those unlucky enough to witness them, it becomes clear that the most terrifying predators are not beasts. They are the humans who have forsaken everything that makes them human, choosing instead a life ruled by instinct, ritual, and the cold logic of the wild. Ethan Carver had spent nearly his entire life in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina. A seasoned woodsman and lifelong hunter, Ethan was known among friends for his patience, precision, and almost uncanny ability to track game through dense Appalachian wilderness. By the fall of 2019, he was 44 years old, with more than 2 decades of experience roaming the ridges and hollows of the mountains he called home. That October, Ethan planned what he described as his dream hunt. He had been invited to hunt on a private tract of land bordering the remote edges of the Pisgah National Forest. 500 acres of unspoiled wilderness passed down for generations through one reclusive mountain family. Few outsiders had ever been allowed there. To Ethan, it was sacred ground. The property sat in one of the most isolated parts of the range, so far from modern civilization that cell service faded more than a dozen miles before you ever reached the gate. The locals in town spoke of the area in hushed tones, warning that the forest kept secrets best left undisturbed. Ethan dismissed most of that talk as mountain folklore. He was eager to begin. He arrived just after dawn on a cool Tuesday morning. The forest glowed with fiery reds and burnt oranges, the last breath of autumn before the long gray winter. A thin veil of mist clung to the valleys between peaks, drifting like smoke through the hollows. Ethan carried everything he needed for a 5-day hunt: his rifle, camping gear, a pack full of supplies, and his trusted knife, worn smooth from years of sharpening. The first 2 days were everything he hoped for. He set up camp near a bubbling spring, scouted several promising trails, and even managed to harvest a healthy buck by the second evening. The wilderness felt alive, vibrant, and strangely welcoming, as though the mountain itself approved of his presence. But on the third morning, things began to change. Ethan was following a narrow game trail deeper into the property when he noticed something odd. At first, he thought he'd stumbled upon another hunter's marker, but as he drew closer, a wave of unease swept through him. Hanging from the branches of an old chestnut oak were small trophies, bones strung together with twisted fibers, feathers arranged in spirals, and what looked like strips of dried hide. The craftsmanship was crude but deliberate, as if someone had been leaving messages in a language older than memory. What chilled Ethan most were the carvings etched into the bark. Crude, human-like figures gouged deep into the wood, scratched out with sharp stone or fingernail. The symbols weren't random. They felt territorial, almost ritualistic. Ethan raised his camera and snapped a few photos. His first thought was to leave immediately, to head back to camp and out of the forest. But another part of him, the hunter, the tracker, the man who had never walked away from the unknown, urged him to push forward. That decision would nearly cost him his life. As he moved deeper, Ethan began to notice the quiet. The birdsong had faded. The chatter of squirrels was gone. Even the wind seemed to hush itself between the trees. An unnatural stillness pressed against him, amplifying every sound of his own boots on the leaf-strewn ground. Then came the footsteps. At first, faint. So faint he convinced himself it was just a deer. But the rhythm was wrong. Too careful, too deliberate. And it mirrored him, stopping when he stopped, turning when he turned. Ethan froze, straining to listen. His pulse pounded so hard it nearly drowned out the forest itself. Then he tested a theory. He snapped a branch beneath his boot. A moment later, the same crack echoed from the shadows behind him. His stomach dropped. Someone was following him. He crouched low, moving with the caution of a prey animal instead of a predator now. Using his binoculars, he scanned the dense undergrowth. And that's when he saw it. 50 yards away, crouched behind a fallen log, was a figure. At first glance, it looked human, but the longer he stared, the less certain he became. The figure moved with a disturbing animalistic grace. Its skin was darkened from weather and scarred with strange marks. It wore no clothing, though the October chill would have frozen any normal man. It crawled low to the ground, using both hands and feet, more like a hunting cat than a person. Its head jerked side to side with sharp bird-like motions, scanning, sniffing, listening. Ethan's mouth went dry. He had seen expert trackers in his life, men who could read the ground like an open book. But this thing was something else. It pressed its face to the soil where he had stepped moments earlier. It sniffed the air, lifted a broken twig to its lips, and tasted it. And then, impossibly, it turned its head and looked straight at him. Their eyes locked across the clearing. What Ethan saw in those eyes froze his blood. They weren't the eyes of a man. They were wild, feral, devoid of any spark of reason or empathy. The figure opened its mouth and released a sound Ethan would never forget. A guttural growl that rose into a piercing, almost human howl. The cry echoed through the hollows, carrying for miles. And then, answering calls came from every direction. Ethan bolted. His instincts screamed louder than his reason now. He ran through the undergrowth, branches tearing at his clothes, rifle clutched tight in his hands. Behind him, multiple sets of footsteps thundered through the forest, accompanied by a chorus of inhuman cries. They weren't chasing him at random. They moved with coordination, cutting him off, driving him, forcing him away from his camp. More than once, Ethan caught glimpses of shadowy figures moving ahead of him, appearing where no one should have been able to move so fast. He realized with horror, they were hurting him. Panic clawed at his chest, but he fought to keep his mind sharp. Years of hunting and survival training surged back. He veered off the trail, choosing the steepest slope he could find, scrambling up the ridge. His lungs burned, his legs screamed, but he refused to stop. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter. They were strong, but they weren't equipped like he was. Eventually, he hauled himself onto a rocky outcrop, back pressed to stone, rifle ready. From there, he could see the valley below, and he could hear them calling to one another, voices echoing through the trees. He stayed there until morning, sleepless, heart hammering every time a cry echoed in the distance. At first light, he crept back toward his camp. His relief at seeing the clearing quickly curdled into dread. His tent was shredded, his supplies scattered, and hanging from the trees around his camp were fresh bone arrangements, trophies eerily similar to what he had found days earlier. They had been there, and they wanted him to know it. Ethan stuffed what little he could salvage into his pack and left immediately, covering the 15 miles back to his truck without stopping once. He never returned to that property. In fact, he gave up solo hunting altogether. Months later, he heard from the landowner that other hunters had begun reporting strange encounters in the same area. A group of hikers even stumbled across what looked like a primitive camp. Shelters made of bark and branches, fire pits, bones scattered about. Authorities dismissed it, suggesting maybe a group of drifters or survivalists were living off-grid. But Ethan knew better. He had looked into their eyes. To this day, he never enters the woods without a sidearm. And he never, ever goes alone. He tells people the same warning whenever they ask. The mountains are older than us. They've been hiding things long before we came here, and some of those things aren't meant to be found. The Patterson family had long dreamed of escaping the chaos of city life, trading the concrete and traffic of Nashville for the solitude of the Appalachian wilderness. Robert Patterson, a software engineer, had spent countless weekends researching land deep in eastern Tennessee, scanning old maps and reading obscure property records. His goal was simple: find a remote plot where his family could live off-grid, reconnect with nature, and raise their children, Emma and Tyler, in a place free from the distractions and dangers of modern life. When a 40-acre tract surfaced in September 2018, he knew he had found it. The property was wildly isolated, with no road access, electricity, or utilities. A partially cleared area bore the remnants of an old cabin foundation, concrete footings jutting from the earth and surrounded by dense oak and pine forests. To Robert, this isolation was a dream come true, a canvas for the life he envisioned. Jennifer, his wife, had initial reservations about the remoteness, especially with 2 young children, but the promise of open spaces, fresh air, and an affordable price eventually won her over. Their first visit that October was meant to be a brief survey. They arrived at dawn, the mountains glowing with autumn reds and golds, the air crisp and fragrant with pine and damp earth. The dirt track leading to the property was treacherous, winding over steep inclines and through narrow ravines, each bend revealing dense, shadowed forests that seemed untouched by time. Emma ran ahead, laughing at the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, while Tyler tripped over roots and rocks, his shrieks mingling with the wind. As they reached the clearing, the partial cabin foundation stood like a relic of forgotten dreams, concrete footings encircled by overgrown shrubs and moss-covered stones. The silence was profound, broken only by distant bird calls and babble of a nearby creek. Exploring the edges of their property, Emma stumbled upon a circle of small wooden dolls and carved animals beneath a sprawling pine. The figures were crude, handmade, and clothed in scraps of fabric, weathered by years of exposure. Jennifer knelt beside them, her stomach tightening. The placement was deliberate. The dolls were arranged as if performing a ritual. Robert suggested the toys might have been left by previous owners' children, but Jennifer remembered the agent's warning. The land had been abandoned for decades, with no neighbors for miles. A chill settled over her, an intuition she couldn't shake. That night, as they camped in a tent set up on the clearing, Jennifer awoke to soft, deliberate footsteps circling their sight. They were human in cadence but careful, silent, deliberate. She shook Robert awake, whispering, and he strained to listen. The sound ceased, leaving only the distant murmur of the creek and the whisper of wind through the trees. Dawn revealed new toys scattered around their tent: another wooden horse, a rag doll with button eyes, small carved animals. They were positioned near Emma and Tyler's sleeping area, near Robert's boots, placed with intimate knowledge of their movements. The Pattersons felt the gaze of unseen eyes. Despite growing unease, Robert proceeded with plans to develop the property. He began regular visits, initially by day, later staying overnight as he worked on the cabin. Each trip revealed more handmade objects: bowls, spoons, baskets woven from twigs and leaves, dolls, and animals. Their placements grew more precise, always in view yet just out of reach, demonstrating observation of the family's routines. Robert installed trail cameras to gather evidence. The images returned showed individuals moving through the dense forest with minimal clothing despite cold, their bodies lean and agile, gliding through brush and trees with animal-like fluidity. Faces were obscured by shadows or foliage, but glimpses revealed wild eyes, sharp and alert. Jennifer recoiled at some images, sensing that the watchers were more than mere trespassers. They were creatures of the forest, shaped by generations of isolation. By March 2019, the cabin was livable. Solar panels powered lights, a well-provided fresh water. The family prepared for their first overnight stay. That evening, as Robert cooked and Jennifer organized the interior, Tyler suddenly pointed toward the windows. Faces, watching. Shadows and light flickered across the glass, and upon investigation, footprints were discovered in the soft soil outside. 4 distinct sets, some child-sized, others larger. Handprints pressed against the windows bore elongated fingers, thickened palms, and rough scarring. Whoever observed them had detailed knowledge of their schedules and movements, remaining unseen yet frighteningly close. The forest outside seemed to breathe with silent anticipation. Night deepened, and with it came voices, low moans, shrill cries, and sounds blending human speech with animalistic tones. The Pattersons huddled together, listening to footsteps circling the cabin, doors rattling lightly, leaves crunching under unseen feet. Jennifer whispered that they should escape immediately, but Robert wanted to assess the situation. The sounds drew closer, then receded, a sinister rhythm that kept them alert, frozen, and terrified. At one point, a shadow moved across the clearing, fluid and crouched, stopping as if to watch their reactions. The family dared not move, each second stretching into eternity. The following morning brought a new horror. Objects and toys were arranged around the cabin deliberately. Dolls dismembered, carved animals marked with crude symbols, baskets smeared with dark, sticky substances. Among them were photographs printed on rough paper, taken from their own trail cameras. Some showed the family at play. Others depicted interior shots of the cabin, taken through windows during times when they believed themselves unobserved. The images left no doubt. The watchers had been tracking their every movement, studying their routines and interactions. Robert realized the message was unmistakable. The land was not theirs. They were intruders on a territory held by generations of isolation. Fearful for their safety, Robert decided they must leave immediately. Despite the months of labor and financial investment, he packed the family into their vehicle, every sound from the forest outside setting his nerves on edge. The road back to Nashville seemed interminable. The twists and turns of the mountain passes filled with imagined shadows and rustling movement. The children were silent, gripping their parents, sensing the tension. Jennifer glanced repeatedly into the rearview mirror, expecting to see figures following them, and for the first hour, imagined that the woods themselves were alive, eyes tracking their escape. Months later, the Pattersons learned they were not alone in their experiences. Other families who had attempted to develop property in the area reported similar occurrences. Handmade objects, footprints, unexplained voices, and sightings of figures moving with impossible agility through dense forest. Local folklore hinted at families retreating into the mountains during the Great Depression, vanishing into the wilderness, and raising descendants who had forgotten modern society entirely. These isolated communities had developed their own language, customs, and territorial awareness, living undetected in the deep forest. The Pattersons sold the land at a financial loss, passing it to a buyer who intended only to use it for hunting. Within months, he reported encountering the same mysterious inhabitants, confirming that the land was actively watched and that any attempt to develop it risked confrontation. Robert and Jennifer now live in a suburban neighborhood where neighbors are visible across the street and the sounds of human civilization offer comfort. Yet the experience left an indelible mark, a persistent wariness when in the mountains, an understanding that in Appalachia's remote heart, the line between human and wild blurs. The land is alive with secrets, and those who have lived in isolation for generations remain vigilant, observing all who trespass, ready to defend the dominion they have claimed beyond the reach of maps, laws, or the modern world. The mountains hold whispers of people shaped entirely by solitude, humans who have abandoned society and adapted to a life where nothing but instinct and experience guide them. The Pattersons learned that even with careful planning, knowledge, and courage, civilization offers no protection against those who have made the wilderness their home. The toys, the carvings, the prints, the eyes in the darkness, they were warnings, memories of what humans can become when untethered from the rules, norms, and comforts of modern life. For the Patterson family, a dream of rural tranquility had been irrevocably shattered, replaced with the haunting knowledge that in Appalachia, some things should never be disturbed, and some territories are meant to remain untouchable, watched by beings who have long forgotten what it means to be human. This story comes from Ethan Caldwell, a man whose family has been entwined with the coal mining and logging traditions of West Virginia for generations. What Ethan was about to reveal had been whispered through his family for decades but was never openly discussed until 2019, after the death of his grandfather. That's when Ethan inherited a collection of items and documents that would forever alter his understanding of his family's past and the strange events that had haunted them for nearly a century. Ethan grew up listening to hushed stories about his great-grandfather, Silas Caldwell, who had been a logging foreman in the 1940s, operating in the remote highlands near the Virginia border. Silas ran a successful logging enterprise, employing dozens of men and clearing massive tracts of old-growth forest to supply timber companies. The operation was highly profitable and respected throughout the region. Then, suddenly, in 1947, the business came to a halt. Workers returned home confused and worried. No explanation was ever given. Silas himself became reticent, speaking little about the last months of the operation. Family lore only recorded that Silas returned home one day, pale and visibly shaken, declaring he would never return to the woods. 70 years passed without an explanation. The logging roads, once bustling with activity, grew over with saplings and thorny undergrowth. Equipment rusted quietly under layers of moss, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Silas took his secret to the grave, and the truth remained hidden, until Ethan inherited his grandfather's belongings, including a sturdy steel box locked away in the basement. Inside the box were dozens of detailed maps documenting the entire logging operation, the roads, cutting zones, equipment depots, and work sites. Yet among the precise annotations, what immediately drew Ethan's attention were DX marks scattered across multiple maps. Some X's marked particular clearings, while others pointed to roads or dense patches of forest. Beside many of these marks, Silas had scrawled warnings in shaky handwriting. Do not enter and forbidden ground. Ethan, driven by curiosity and a desire to understand the family history, decided to explore these abandoned logging roads himself. He told himself he was looking for closure, or perhaps discovering equipment or relics left behind. What he didn't know was that the forest still held secrets far more terrifying than lost tools or forgotten vehicles. On a brisk October morning, Ethan loaded his ATV with camping gear, maps, and supplies, and set off toward the mountains. The main logging road was still visible, but decades of overgrowth had narrowed it to little more than a deer path. Following Silas's maps, he wound deeper into the forest than he had ever gone before. The trees here were immense, their branches blocking much of the sunlight, casting long shadows even in the late morning. After roughly 2 hours of careful navigation, he arrived at the site marked as the primary equipment depot on the map. Rusted logging trucks, a bulldozer half buried in vines, and scattered tools lay across the clearing. The scene was haunting. It looked as if the workers had simply vanished one day, leaving everything behind. Ethan's attention was drawn to one particular map in his backpack. It corresponded exactly with this clearing. And there, marked in bright red ink, was an X accompanied by the ominous note, "Do not enter." According to Silas's maps, a logging road continued north from this clearing, leading to an area labeled as the Big Clearing. This road was marked with multiple red X's and a final note that read, "Stay away. They do not want us there." Every instinct screamed at Ethan to turn back, yet something compelled him forward. Need to understand what had terrified his great-grandfather so profoundly. With a deep breath, he started his ATV and followed the overgrown paths. The road was nearly impassable. Branches clawed at his helmet and thick underbrush tugged at the ATV's wheels. Even more unsettling than the physical obstacles was the oppressive silence. Ethan had spent countless hours in the West Virginia backcountry, yet he had never encountered such absolute quiet. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, No insects, only the low hum of his engine, which seemed muted, unnatural. About a mile into the forbidden path, the road opened into a vast clearing, exactly as Silas's map had predicted. Ethan froze. At first he thought the clearing was empty, but then his eyes adjusted, and the truth made his blood run cold. At the center stood an enormous tree, easily 8 feet in diameter and soaring higher than any other tree Ethan had ever seen. Its bark was dark, almost black, and the branches twisted skyward in grotesque, unnatural patterns. But the tree alone was not the source of fear. Around its base were the remnants of logging equipment, a chainsaw, worn boots, hard hats, all arranged meticulously. Hanging from the lower branches were dozens of articles of clothing, flannel shirts, work pants, gloves and hats, weathered and faded yet deliberately positioned. Ethan realized with horror that this was a shrine, a deliberate display of the belongings of loggers, likely Silas's crew. As he sat frozen on his idling ATV, Ethan became aware of a shift in the forest's atmosphere. The quiet had become expectant, almost watchful. The air grew cold rapidly, and his breath fogged before him. Then he heard it, a faint melodic sound, initially indistinguishable from the wind. As it grew louder, he realized it was not the wind at all. It was singing, multiple voices harmonizing in a language unknown to him, emanating from deep within the forest. Panic surged. Ethan knew he had to leave. He revved the ATV and turned to flee down the path, but the singi, Nong, abruptly stopped. In the eerie stillness that followed, he detected footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and unlike any animal he had encountered. Something was moving through the forest, encircling the clearing. From the edge of the clearing, Ethan glimpsed figures slipping between the tree trunks with fluid, unnatural grace. They were humanoid but unnervingly tall and thin, moving in ways that suggested joints and limbs unlike those of normal humans. One figure stepped partially into the dim light, revealing a face that was not a face at all, a hollow, dark, tree trunk-like visage, yet unmistakably aware. The creature raised one impossibly long arm and pointed directly at Ethan. Immediately, the singing resumed, louder and more commanding, as if the sound itself had become a weapon. Other figures emerged, equally distorted, all directing their attention toward him. Fear overrode caution. Ethan pushed the ATV to its limits, careening down the narrow path as the creatures moved effortlessly through the surrounding forest, keeping pace despite the dense undergrowth. Branches lashed at him, the rough terrain jolted the machine, yet he did not slow. The forest seemed alive, a hunting ground for beings who had long ago abandoned human limitations. The chase ended only when Ethan reached the main logging road. The creatures vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving nothing but silent, empty forest behind. He drove without pause back to town, heart pounding, mind reeling. That night he burned every map, every document inherited from Silas, vowing never to return. Research into his family's history confirmed what he feared most. Newspaper archives from 1947 detailed the mysterious disappearance of 7 members of Silas's logging crew over the span of 2 months. Search parties found no trace of the men, and authorities dismissed the disappearances as accidents of the treacherous logging industry. Ethan now understood the grim truth. The belongings of the crew had been preserved by something in the forest, trophies in a shrine maintained by entities that did not welcome human intrusion. Ethan never ventured into the backwoods alone again. He ensured his children understood the dangers of seeking out the abandoned logging roads. Some family secrets, he realized, are meant to remain hidden, protected by the ancient and merciless wilderness that surrounds them. The forest keeps its own, and those who dare disturb its boundaries do so at their peril. Because in the deepest forgotten hollows of West Virginia, where towering trees have stood for centuries, and rivers cut silently through moss-covered stones, some forests are not merely homes to animals. They are territories guarded by beings that defy human understanding, reminders that some boundaries, once crossed, can never be truly forgotten. This account comes from Hannah Lewis, a seasoned solo hiker and wilderness photographer from Charlottesville, Virginia. In October 2020, she embarked on what she believed would be a routine 3-day backpacking expedition through the most secluded stretches of George Washington National Forest. Hannah had been planning this trip for months, meticulously studying topographical maps, weather patterns, and photography spots where the autumn foliage would be at its most vibrant. She imagined crisp mountain air, golden and crimson leaves, and the quiet solitude of untouched forest. What began as an idyllic journey quickly spiraled into a survival ordeal that would challenge everything she thought she knew about the wilderness and the humans who might inhabit it. Hannah's chosen route led her deep into the heart of the forest, away from established trails, where sunlight struggled to pierce through the dense canopy of old-growth oaks, maples, and pines. Her pack was loaded with 4 days' worth of provisions, emergency equipment, and photography gear. She carried GPS devices, a compass, detailed maps, and communication tools, confident that she could navigate any difficulty the wilderness might throw her way. After years of solo expeditions, she considered herself prepared for almost anything. Her journey began without incident. On Thursday morning, she parked her car at a small trailhead and followed a clearly marked path for the first 8 miles. Birds sang overhead, and the gentle rustling of leaves underfoot was punctuated by the occasional snap of a twig. She paused frequently, capturing photographs of sunlight streaming through autumn foliage and the textures of moss-covered rocks. For a moment, it felt like the forest existed only for her, a private gallery of natural artistry. By midday Friday, she veered off the well-trodden trail, heading toward the more remote peaks where she hoped to capture unique vantage points. Dense underbrush made progress slower, and the forest grew unnervingly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Hannah's GPS devices began acting erratically. The dense canopy interfered with satellite reception, leaving her uncertain of her exact location. At first, she convinced herself it was minor interference, but by late afternoon, she realized she had lost her bearings entirely. Landmarks from her map no longer matched what she saw, and the trail she thought she was following had disappeared entirely. Hannah's confidence began to waver. By Friday evening, she understood the full gravity of the situation. She was genuinely lost. Her emergency protocols kicked in. She found a small clearing where search helicopters might spot her if they were deployed, set up a makeshift camp, and rationed her food. She had informed friends of her plans and expected return, so she knew people would begin searching for her if she failed to return by Sunday evening. Saturday brought relentless challenges. A cold front rolled through, drenching the forest in freezing rain and whipping wind. Her small tent shivered under the storm, and visibility dropped to mere yards. Hannah spent hours inside, shivering, conserving heat, and rationing her food while hoping the storm would pass. She thought about her previous solo hikes and how quickly the wilderness had turned from beautiful to hostile. Her previous confidence in her equipment and skills now felt almost naive. By Sunday morning, Hannah faced a stark reality. Her food supplies would last only one more day, and staying put indefinitely was no longer an option. The storm had passed, leaving the forest eerily silent, but she remained without a clear path. Using her compass, she decided to head east, hoping to eventually intersect a road or trail where she might find help. Her pace was slow. The forest floor was littered with fallen branches, slick moss, and hidden roots that threatened to trip her at every step. It was during this cautious, desperate trek that she stumbled upon something utterly unexpected. In a narrow valley between two ridges, partially hidden beneath the shadow of massive boulders, she saw the outline of a primitive shelter. Its walls were constructed from carefully stacked stones, its roof woven from branches and animal hides. The craftsmanship suggested a sophisticated understanding of survival in the wild, yet it had been built using only natural materials. No modern tools, no nails or screws. Hannah approached cautiously. Her instincts screamed that she might not be welcome here, that she had stumbled into territory where a visitor might not survive scrutiny. She called out, following standard etiquette for approaching occupied sites in the wilderness, but received no response. Silence stretched for minutes, broken only by the soft whisper of leaves in the wind. Curious and anxious, she crept closer. Around the shelter's entrance were what appeared to be trophies: skulls of small animals, feathers, strips of hide. Some of the items were decorated in elaborate patterns, suggesting a ritualistic or cultural significance. Interwoven among these primitive displays were fragments of modern hiking gear: a torn nylon strap, pieces of plastic or aluminum, scraps of fabric. These items suggested that previous hikers had left their belongings here, or worse, had encountered the inhabitants directly. Hannah realized she might not be the first lost traveler to arrive at this secluded homestead, and that the previous guests may not have left voluntarily. Movement inside the shelter startled her. Hannah pressed herself behind a tree and observed. The figure that emerged was human, yet profoundly altered by life in isolation. Their clothing was entirely made of stitched-together animal hides, adorned with bones, feathers, and symbols that seemed to carry deep signifies. Cants. Their long, unkempt hair framed a sun-darkened face, and their movements were startlingly fluid, as if the forest itself guided them. Every step, every glance suggested an individual who had adapted fully to wilderness life, living by instincts more animal than civilized. Hannah's heart pounded as the figure scanned the area, clearly detecting her presence. Their movements were deliberate, methodical, analyzing footprints, disturbed vegetation, traces of her passage. Then came the shock. The figure spoke. The words were fragmented, blending English with strange, alien sounds, creating a hybrid language both comprehensible and utterly foreign. The figure's tone was urgent, curious, but not overtly threatening. Hannah made a split-second decision. She stepped from behind the tree, hands raised in a non-threatening gesture, and explained that she was lost, needing guidance to reach the nearest road or trail. The figure's reaction was immediate. They approached with excitement, gesturing toward the shelter and speaking rapidly in their hybrid tongue. Their body language suggested an invitation, offering food, shelter, and protection, but also implying that acceptance might involve staying indefinitely. Fragments of the conversation became clear to Hannah. This feral community had helped previous lost travelers, some of whom had chosen never to return to the outside world. The offer was tempting: a warm fire, food, safety. But the price was uncertainty, a life bound to the forest's rules rather than her own. Hannah politely declined, requesting only directions to the nearest accessible path. The figure's demeanor shifted noticeably. Their enthusiasm dimmed, replaced by concern and subtle disappointment. They still provided clear directions, marking landmarks and warning her of potential dangers, areas where hungry ones and night hunters roamed, subtle hints that not all lost travelers in this region were met with hospitality. Hannah listened intently, storing every word as she prepared to leave. She followed the given path, climbing toward a ridgeline where she eventually encountered a Forest Service road. By late afternoon, she had flagged down a maintenance vehicle that took her to safety. Hannah had been missing 4 days. Had she not followed the directions carefully, rescue teams would have begun their search the next morning, unaware of the precise danger she had narrowly avoided. Hannah reported the encounter to park authorities, giving GPS coordinates and a detailed description of the shelter and its inhabitant. Weeks later, when rangers visited the location, the shelter had vanished completely, as if it had never existed. No trace of recent human activity remained. Hannah suspects that the feral community had been alerted to her presence, relocating swiftly to avoid detection. The encounter left Hannah profoundly changed. She now carries emergency satellite communicators on all future trips and warns other solo hikers. The most remote wilderness areas may hide people who have abandoned modern society entirely. Some may offer help, others may not. The rules of civilized interaction no longer apply, and choices made in desperation can have consequences that linger far beyond the forest. Because in the deepest, most secluded valleys of Appalachia, where the trees have stood for centuries and streams have run untamed, The wilderness hides more than just wildlife. Sometimes the people you encounter there have forsaken the civilized world entirely, and the assistance they offer may come at a cost you cannot fully understand until you've already stepped into their domain. This account comes from Lucas Anders, a seasoned mushroom forager and wilderness explorer from Pennsylvania. Known in the local mycology community for his expertise and careful methodology, Lucas has spent decades studying the forests of the Appalachian region, hunting rare and elusive fungi. What he experienced in the remote Appalachian woodlands near the Pennsylvania-West Virginia border is something he insists is completely real, though still unexplained to this day. Lucas had been foraging mushrooms since his early teens, gradually developing a meticulous understanding of the habits, growth patterns, and seasonal cycles of various fungi. Morel mushrooms, prized for their taste and rarity, had become a particular obsession. His expeditions often took him deep into areas few dared to explore. Dense, untraveled sections of the Appalachian forests where the canopy thickened and sunlight rarely reached the forest floor. In June 2022, Lucas set out for a valley that had long fascinated him, known locally as Shadow Creek Hollow. Tales of extraordinary mushroom finds and equally mysterious disappearances had surrounded the valley for generations. Many local foragers warned against entering it, claiming people who ventured too deeply sometimes never returned. Yet Lucas, respectful of the forest yet driven by a passion for fungi, decided he could handle it. Equipped with GPS, first aid supplies, a satellite-capable phone, and a small pack of essential tools, he set off at dawn, intent on a careful exploration. The trek into Shadow Creek Hollow took him over 2 hours of winding paths, with the trail narrowing as he approached the valley floor. The forest grew denser, the canopy so thick that daylight barely penetrated, and the air hung heavy with dampness, moss, and the earthy scent of decaying vegetation. Small streams whispered over rocks, and the ground was slick with fallen leaves. Lucas immediately felt the subtle tension in the air, a sensation that the forest itself was watching him. As he began searching for mushrooms, a strange sight caught his eye, a nearly perfect circle of fairy ring fungi. Fairy rings occur naturally, caused by mycelium expanding outward in uniform patterns, but this circle was unlike anything Lucas had encountered. The mushrooms were unusually large, with faint luminescent blue tones that pulsed softly in the dim light. At the center, the soil was bare and oddly sterile, as though the growth of the fungi had drained all life from the immediate area. Curious, Lucas stepped into the ring. The moment he did, a chill swept across the hollow, and the normal ambient sounds of the forest, birdsong, insect hum, the rustle of small mammals, fell silent. The quiet was almost oppressive. Despite his training and years of experience in the wilderness, Lucas felt an unmistakable presence observing him from the shadows. Trying to maintain composure, he examined the mushrooms, taking careful photographs and notes. Yet as he circled the ring, he noticed unnatural shifts in the environment. Trees leaned slightly inward, as if drawn toward the circle, and shadows pooled unnaturally beneath the canopy. Every movement he made seemed to be mirrored by the forest itself, as though it were a living, conscious entity. Then Lucas noticed objects on the ground ahead. At first glance, he thought they were tree roots or fallen branches, but as he drew closer, he realized they were worn leather shoes arranged in a smaller circle, echoing the pattern of the fairy ring above. Interspersed among them were bones, some animal, others difficult to identify, gnawed or worn in ways that defied explanation. The unsettling symmetry of it all caused a cold dread to settle in Lucas's chest. He paused on a fallen log to collect his thoughts. Tales from locals surfaced in his mind, stories of forest spirits guarding the oldest, most sacred groves and punishing anyone who crossed unseen boundaries. Many warned of Shadow Creek Hollow in particular, claiming that it was a place where the forest would consume those who ventured too far. Lucas, experienced and cautious, felt the gravity of these warnings now more than ever. Movement suddenly flickered at the edge of his vision. Lucas looked up and caught a glimpse of a tall, shadowy figure moving silently between the trees. It was impossibly thin, with elongated limbs that bent in ways no human or known animal could. The figure watched him, gliding with eerie grace, and then vanished as he raised his camera to capture it. Despite the fear gnawing at him, Lucas continued to gather specimens, intent on not showing panic. As he made his way out of the valley, however, he realized something deeply wrong. The landmarks he had relied on for orientation were subtly shifted. The trail twisted differently, rocks and trees seemed displaced, and even his GPS briefly lost signal before rebooting and indicating he was off course. The forest, it seemed, had altered itself. A faint blue glow appeared ahead, similar to the light of the mushrooms in the fairy ring. Drawn toward it, Lucas found a massive ancient oak at the edge of the valley, its base surrounded by the same luminescent fungi arranged in an intricate pattern that resembled a symbol. Beneath the tree, partially buried, was a small hand-carved wooden box. Lucas carefully unearthed it and discovered several aged artifacts: a rusted pocket watch, a cracked leather journal, and faded photographs of a man named Jonathan Weaver, another forager who had vanished in Shadow Creek Hollow decades earlier. The journal contained Weaver's meticulous records of the valley, inked, looting observations of fairy rings, unnatural silences, and glimpses of shadowy figures moving through the forest. His final entry ended abruptly, with a warning to anyone who might follow. Do not cross the circle. Do not disturb what guards these woods. Lucas felt the weight of Weaver's words keenly, understanding that some forces in the hollow were both ancient and vigilant. A gust of wind suddenly swept through the clearing, causing the glowing mushrooms to flicker before dimming. The oppressive atmosphere lifted and normal forest sounds returned. Lucas retraced his steps, leaving the collected specimens in their original pattern beneath the oak, and finally reached the main trail before nightfall. Yet even after leaving the forest, the experience lingered. The mushrooms he had brought home continued to glow softly each night, and vivid dreams of the hollow haunted him, visions of standing inside the fairy ring while shadowy figures watched, never approaching directly but always observing with calculated patience. 3 weeks later, Lucas returned the mushrooms to the fairy ring in Shadow Creek Hollow, arranging them precisely where they had originated. As he did so, the glow briefly intensified before returning to a steady, dim luminescence. The oppressive sense of being watched lifted, and Lucas finally felt a measure of peace. The incident profoundly changed his perspective on the wilderness. Lucas emphasizes that some areas are guarded by forces far older than humans, and boundaries exist that cannot be crossed without consequence. Shadow Creek Hollow, he asserts, remains a sacred territory, its mysteries protected by guardians whose patience spans centuries. Today, Lucas Anders warns fellow foragers and explorers about venturing into the deep hollows of the Appalachian forests. Some parts of the mountains are not meant for casual exploration, he says, and the forest itself may punish intrusions with consequences that cannot be undone. The story of the glowing fairy rings and the unseen guardians of Shadow Creek Hollow has become part of regional folklore, and Lucas's detailed account serves as a chilling reminder of the ancient, watchful powers that still dwell in these old Appalachian woods. This account comes from Valeria Sanchez, a professional nature photographer with years of experience documenting the wilderness of the southeastern United States. Known for her specialization in nocturnal wildlife photography, Valeria had contributed to National Geographic and multiple conservation journals. She was meticulous, deliberate, and extremely familiar with backcountry survival techniques, a fact that makes her story all the more chilling. In September 2021, Valeria was commissioned by a prestigious environmental magazine to photograph the ancient forests of the Great Smoky Mountains. The assignment required capturing both the daytime grandeur and the subtle nocturnal life of the region. Valeria, who had traversed these mountains dozens of times before, considered this an ideal project. She meticulously planned a week-long expedition, choosing areas she had never photographed before, remote valleys where human impact was minimal, and the forest had remained virtually unchanged for centuries. Her preparation was exhaustive. She obtained all necessary permits for backcountry photography, studied topographical maps, and programmed GPS waypoints for strategic locations. She carried 2 high-end digital cameras with infrared capabilities, multiple telephoto lenses, motion-activated trail cameras, and professional lighting equipment specifically designed for low-light photography. Her backpack also contained food, water, first aid, emergency signaling devices, and extra batteries. She had planned for the unexpected, or so she thought. The first 3 days proceeded without incident. Valeria captured images of black bears foraging along streams, owls perched silently in ancient trees, and delicate nocturnal insects illuminated by her infrared equipment. Each night, she reviewed the photographs and adjusted her camera settings to optimize for low-light conditions. The forest felt alive, yet strangely distant, as if it were observing her just as much as she was observing it. By the 4th day, Valeria had more than enough material for the magazine article. Still, a deep curiosity compelled her to explore an uncharted valley marked on her maps as containing some of the oldest trees in the region. The valley was accessible only via an unmarked trail, requiring several hours of strenuous hiking through dense undergrowth. Sunlight barely penetrated the towering canopy, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. Valeria felt a thrill at the prospect of capturing untouched wilderness, unaware of how that decision would haunt her. She arrived at the valley floor late in the afternoon, setting up her base camp near a slow-moving stream. The air was thick with the smell of moss and decaying leaves, and the silence was almost tangible. Even during daylight hours, the forest seemed unnaturally quiet. Birds did not sing, and small mammals did not rustle in the underbrush. Valeria initially attributed the stillness to the dense canopy and deep isolation. She methodically unpacked her cameras, arranged tripods, and set up motion-activated devices along what she anticipated would be animal pathways. As evening fell, she prepared for her nighttime photography session. The nearly full moon provided muted illumination, casting pale light over the valley. Valeria moved carefully through the shadows, her infrared camera allowing her to observe wildlife without disturbing their natural behavior. At first, everything appeared normal. She photographed raccoons rummaging along the stream, a solitary owl perched silently on a branch, and a fox padding along a fallen log. Then she noticed subtle anomalies. Her infrared display flickered intermittently, capturing shapes she did not recognize. At first, she blamed the humidity or condensation on her lenses, but the images revealed humanoid silhouettes standing among the trees, dark, featureless forms devoid of heat signatures. They appeared at the edges of her frames, sometimes centered, sometimes partially obscured by shadows. The more she captured, the clearer it became. These were not animals, they were something else. Valeria's heartbeat quickened. Each photograph revealed figures that seemed aware of her cameras. In one image, 7 tall silhouettes encircled a massive oak tree. In another, one stood directly behind her previous position, perfectly aligned with the angle from which she had just taken a shot. Every image heightened the sense of being watched. The forest itself seemed to respond to their presence. The profound silence deepened. Even the wind ceased to stir the leaves. Her breaths came in visible puffs, though the evening had been warm when she started her session. Valeria felt a sudden chill run through her body, the kind that signals danger instinctively. She packed her main camera, intending to retreat to her base camp, but the camera took pictures autonomously, firing rapidly, capturing dozens of frames before stopping. Reviewing the images, Valeria's stomach turned. The figures had multiplied, now appearing closer and more numerous. One was less than 10 feet away, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, and impossibly thin. Its face was a dark void, absorbing all light, as if staring into an abyss. A primal fear gripped her. Whatever these entities were, they were intelligent, aware, and observing her movements deliberately. Valeria's first instinct was to flee. She moved quickly, flashlight in hand, through the forest. But the autonomous photography continued, and every new image revealed more figures keeping pace, positioned strategically around her. Some appeared to flow through solid trees, others gliding over the uneven terrain with impossible speed. Their dark forms moved with eerie coordination, suggesting some form of communication or hunting strategy. The forest had transformed into an alien landscape. Branches that should have brushed against her arms now seemed to reach out, the shadows themselves stretching unnaturally. The figures never made a sound but seemed to manipulate the environment, moving in ways that defied natural physics. Leaves did not crunch under their feet. Twigs did not snap. They were not bound by the same rules as any creature Valeria had ever studied. Her mind raced. She remembered local folklore. The Cherokee had long considered this part of the smoke sacred, a place where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds thinned. Tales spoke of guardians protecting the oldest groves, punishing those who ventured too deeply. At first, Valeria dismissed these as myths. Now, alone and being pursued by entities that were neither fully human nor animal, she began to question every rational assumption she had ever made about the forest. The pursuit became a blur of shadows and motion. Valeria ran blindly through the valley, twisting along the stream, dodging low-hanging branches and leaping over roots. Every time she paused to check her camera, the figures had advanced, forming a tightening perimeter. One image captured a figure suspended midair between two trees, limbs elongated unnaturally, as if the very laws of gravity and anatomy did not apply to it. Another frame revealed dark shapes emerging from the ground itself, rising like sentient shadows given substance. Valeria's breath came in ragged gasps. She realized they were not only tracking her, but coordinating, anticipating her every move. Every logical thought faded beneath the sheer terror of being surrounded by entities that should not exist. She abandoned caution entirely and ran for the main trail, stumbling over rocks and roots. The sound following her was no longer footsteps. It was a low, undulating noise, like wind rushing through unseen channels, yet no wind existed. It seemed alive, responding to her panic. The forest itself had become complicit, every shadow hiding one of these relentless forms. Finally, the trail appeared. Valeria sprinted toward her vehicle, heart hammering, body exhausted, yet unwilling to glance back. When she reached the car, slamming doors behind her, she dared to review her camera. The final images showed dozens of dark figures at the forest's edge, just inside the tree line. Their attention was fixed entirely on her, but they did not cross into the open, as if a boundary had been established that she had violated. Valeria drove directly home and never returned to that valley. She submitted her assignment using only the images captured in the first 3 days. She never shared the final night's photographs with anyone, nor spoke publicly of what she had witnessed. She conducted extensive research into the valley afterward. Records showed a long history of unexplained disappearances dating back centuries, with settlers noting sudden vanishings of hunters, travelers, and even surveyors. Local Cherokee tradition spoke of the valley as a threshold between worlds, protected by shadow guardians who punished intrusions. Even historical accounts of early European explorers described strange black figures observed in the trees, appearing without a trace when approached. Valeria's encounter left her permanently changed. She no longer undertakes solo photography in remote forests. She warns other wilderness travelers. Some places are not meant to be entered, some things are not meant to be seen, and some subjects, no matter how captivating, are better left unphotographed. Because in the deepest, most ancient corners of the Smokies, even a professional who understands every aspect of survival can find herself entirely outmatched. And sometimes, the watchers are not animals, not spirits, not humans, but something that exists beyond all comprehension, yet aware of your every move. In Valeria's own words, "I went to capture beauty, but the forest reminded me that some beauty is a trap, some silence is a warning, and some shadows are alive." This story comes from Mara Delaney, a veteran search and rescue volunteer based in Virginia who had spent more than a decade helping locate missing persons in the Appalachian backcountry. Over the years, Mara had been involved in countless recovery missions, ranging from lost hikers to treacherous mountain rescues. But the case she encountered in 2023 tested every principle she believed about wilderness operations. It remains, to this day, the most disturbing and confounding search she has ever undertaken. Mara had joined the Virginia Mountain Rescue Corps nearly 12 years earlier, earning a reputation for her calm demeanor, methodical approach, and exceptional navigational skills. Her experience spanned wilderness first aid, advanced rope and cliff rescue, and navigation in dense, unmapped forest terrain. Her colleagues trusted her implicitly during high-stakes missions, knowing that she could maintain composure even in life-threatening situations. In late October of 2023, Mara was called to lead a search for a group of 5 experienced hikers who had not returned from a multi-day trek in a remote section of the Blue Ridge Mountains, known locally as Ravenwood Ridge. The group had been missing for 3 days, and local rangers were concerned because this area was rarely traversed except by the most seasoned outdoors enthusiasts. The hikers were not novices. Their leader, Daniel Harper, was a wilderness survival instructor with over 15 years of Appalachian hiking experience. Accompanying him were Alicia Reynolds, a geology professor from Virginia Commonwealth University, Nathan Briggs, a professional wildlife photographer, Emily Carter, a park ranger from Shenandoah National Park, and Kevin Lee, a medical student who regularly participated in wilderness first aid and survival training programs. All were properly equipped for extended backcountry expeditions, with advanced navigation tools, emergency supplies, and camping gear suitable for harsh conditions. The last communication from the group had come 4 days prior. Daniel Harper had sent a cryptic message through his satellite communicator to a close contact, stating only, "Route adjusted, discovered something unforeseen, cave system off maps, update tomorrow." No further messages were received, and the unusual brevity and vagueness immediately concerned Mara. Harper was known for detailed logs and consistent communication, so this sudden shift suggested that something had altered the group's planned course or that they had encountered a situation beyond their usual experiences. Upon arrival at the staging area near Ravenwood Ridge, Mara was assigned to lead one of 3 teams. Each team had a distinct search sector based on the missing hikers' last known positions and Harper's final satellite coordinates. The sector assigned to Mara included some of the least explored portions of the ridge, dense forests with steep inclines, and areas mapped only roughly in older survey charts. Local folklore had long portrayed Ravenwood Ridge as a mysterious and occasionally dangerous location, but Mara had always approached such stories with skepticism, attributing disappearances to natural hazards rather than the supernatural. On the second day of the search, Mara's team came upon the first evidence of the missing hikers. The site was an abandoned trailhead far from their intended route. Scattered neatly across the clearing were items clearly belonging to the missing group. Daniel Harper's distinctive blue backpack, Alicia Reynolds' water bottle marked with her university logo, Nathan Briggs' camera bag, Emily Carter's ranger gear, and Kevin Lee's medical supplies. The arrangement of these items was troubling. They were organized, not tossed in a panic, and showed no signs of animal interference despite days of exposure. Even more perplexing was the presence of essential survival tools, portable water filters, emergency blankets, first aid kits, all items an experienced hiker would never leave behind voluntarily. Among the equipment, Mara discovered a small waterproof journal belonging to Harper, providing crucial insight into the group's movements and discoveries. Harper's journal detailed how the group had been following their planned trail when Alicia Reynolds noticed unusual geological formations, suggesting the presence of an undocumented cave system. Intrigued by the anomaly, Harper recorded that they decided to investigate the site, despite feeling an inexplicable sense of unease. According to his notes, the cave entrance was partially hidden by fallen trees and thick undergrowth, almost as if nature itself sought to conceal it. Harper's descriptions of the cave entrance were unsettling. The opening was unusually large, larger than typical limestone formations in the area, and the rock face was marked with strange symbols. These carvings were deliberate, etched with precision and bore no resemblance to known Native American petroglyphs or historic inscriptions. Harper recorded that the group experienced an immediate sense of being watched, an instinctive warning to retreat. Yet curiosity and scientific interest pushed them forward. His final entry ended with coordinates: 38.2642 north, 78.8925 west. We feel something wrong here, but exploration cannot be ignored. If anything happens, this is the last known location. Using these coordinates, Mara's team located the cave entrance. It was partially obscured by thick foliage and fallen logs, confirming Harper's account. From the outset, Mara felt an unusual tension in the air. Every member of her team, trained in cave search operations, reported an unsettling feeling of being observed. The cave's exterior seemed disproportionately large, and the strange carvings on the rock sent an unshakable message that something was deliberately hidden within. Equipped with professional caving gear, headlamps, safety ropes, and communication devices, Mara's team began their descent into the cave. The interior was unlike any cave system they had previously encountered. Passages were unnaturally uniform, wider than typical natural formations, and the temperature dropped sharply compared to the mild autumn air outside. The first 100 feet revealed footprints matching the missing hiker's boots, along with additional equipment, arranged in patterns, suggesting intentional placement rather than an accidental drop. Approximately 200 feet into the cave, Mara's team made a discovery that deepened the mystery. Personal items belonging to all 5 missing hikers were arranged deliberately in a circle. Harper's communicator, Reynolds's geological tools, Briggs' camera equipment, Carter's ranger badge, and Lee's medical kit. The symmetry suggested deliberate placement, as if part of a ritual or offering. Yet the hikers themselves were nowhere to be found. As they pressed further, Mara noticed odd acoustic phenomena. Whispers echoed from distant passages, seemingly human but distorted, overlapping, and impossible to localize. Footsteps appeared to parallel their movements, but visual confirmation revealed nothing. Some team members reported shadows shifting in peripheral vision. Mara herself caught glimpses of tall, humanoid silhouettes in the distance, only to find empty tunnels when directly observed. The cave's architecture became increasingly illogical. Passages ended abruptly, only to reappear elsewhere. Tunnels looped back unexpectedly, defying basic geological principles. Compasses spun unpredictably, and GPS devices gave contradictory readings. Mara logged every detail, aware that disorientation could be as deadly as any physical hazard. But even her careful documentation failed to account for the maze-like transformations. After 6 hours, the team believed they had mapped over a mile of tunnels and chambers, but still found no trace of the hikers. Equipment caches and carefully arranged personal items were all that remained. Passageways continued indefinitely, some requiring specialized climbing gear to access, suggesting the cave extended far beyond documented survey data. The most terrifying moment occurred during their attempted exit. Returning along a previously navigated route, passages they had mapped earlier were gone, replaced by solid rock walls. Markers left to track progress had vanished. The team experienced complete disorientation, with hours of navigation lost to sudden, inexplicable changes in the cave. Mara's team eventually located the entrance by following subtle air currents and distant sounds, but their watches indicated several hours had elapsed beyond accounted search time. 6 hours inside the cave had become more than 10. The search continued for 5 more days, incorporating additional teams, specialized cave rescue units, and mapping specialists. Yet no trace of Harper, Reynolds, Briggs, Carter, or Lee was ever recovered. Official reports concluded the hikers had likely succumbed to injury or exposure in dangerous passages beyond reach. Personal effects were explained as abandoned for ease of travel in an emergency. However, Mara knew the explanation was insufficient. The deliberate arrangement of personal items, passages, the unexplained acoustic phenomena, and the persistent sense of being watched pointed to something far beyond natural causes. Further research revealed a troubling pattern. Historical records from the early 1800s describe similar disappearances on Ravenwood Ridge, always involving small groups encountering previously undocumented caves. Cherokee oral traditions describe the ridge as a liminal space, where the physical world overlapped with the spiritual, and ancient guardians preserved sacred sites from intrusion. Mara believed that whatever had claimed the hikers operated within these boundaries. Since the incident, Mara has refused to return to Ravenwood Ridge and advises extreme caution to anyone operating in the area. She believes some discoveries are intentionally concealed, guarded by forces beyond human comprehension. The case of the 5 missing hikers remains unsolved, but Mara's detailed account serves as a stark warning. Even experienced and well-prepared outdoors enthusiasts can be swallowed by the unexplained in the Appalachian wilderness. Despite exhaustive mapping attempts, the cave remains unlocatable. Its entrances and passageways appear to shift, confounding even the most methodical search efforts. The ridge, Mara asserts, still holds secrets, preserving them through mechanisms, natural, supernatural, or both, that humanity cannot yet understand. The incident left Mara and her team profoundly unsettled. Every subsequent expedition in adjacent sections of the ridge carried a subtle tension, an awareness that the mountains are not entirely governed by human logic. While official narratives have attempted to rationalize the events, Mara knows the truth is more complex, more dangerous, and far beyond conventional explanation. In the end, the disappearance of Harper, Reynolds, Briggs, Carter, and Lee stands as a haunting testament to the limits of human knowledge in the deep Appalachian wilderness. The case remains a chilling reminder that some areas are protected by forces indifferent to human presence, that ancient landscapes may harbor guardians who enforce boundaries unseen, and that even seasoned experts can vanish without a trace when those boundaries are crossed. Mara Delaney continues to advise new search and rescue volunteers, stressing not only the importance of preparation and skill, but also the respect and caution owed to areas with a history of unexplained events. She emphasizes that some territories in the Appalachians are preserved not by law or signage, but by forces beyond comprehension, and intrusion may carry consequences that no training or technology can prevent. The story of Ravenwood Ridge and the missing hikers has entered local folklore, a grim warning repeated in search and rescue briefings, outdoor education programs, and whispered among the climbing and hiking community. For those who venture into the deep backcountry, Mara's account is a chilling guide. Respect the land, note the anomalies, and understand that some mysteries are deliberately shielded from human eyes. Even now, the ridge stands silent, its secrets intact, and the cave where Harper and his companions disappeared remains uncharted, an enduring enigma hidden beneath the mountains. This chilling narrative is sourced from the confidential archives of the Vermont Department of Natural Resources, provided by retired Regional Supervisor Julian Thorne. He worked closely with Warden Leah Donovan for over a decade before the event that abruptly ended Leah's distinguished career and forever altered the lives of her colleagues and friends. The following is a detailed account, including actual radio logs from Leah's final patrol and the first-hand reports from the search and rescue teams dispatched to find her. Leah Donovan had dedicated nearly 10 years of her life to serving as a park warden at Green Mountain National Forest. Among her peers, she was respected as one of the most capable and dependable wardens in the entire Vermont system. With a deep understanding of the wilderness, Leah was a skilled tracker, a certified emergency medical responder, and had completed advanced training in search and rescue techniques. She was the person supervisors called upon for the toughest assignments, confident in her ability to handle any challenge the rugged mountains might throw at her. In the autumn of 2023, the department began receiving multiple reports from hikers regarding strange occurrences in a secluded, rarely traversed section of the forest known as Whispering Creek Basin. The accounts described unearthly shrieking sounds that didn't match any known animal vocalizations, as well as fleeting glimpses of large, shadowy figures moving through the trees after dark. Initially, park management dismissed these stories as typical misidentifications of local wildlife. However, When the reports persisted for several weeks, they decided an investigation was necessary. Leah willingly took on the assignment. She was intimately familiar with Whispering Creek Basin, having patrolled the area numerous times over the years. She was confident she could quickly get to the bottom of the disturbances and allay the hikers' fears. Her plan was straightforward. She would hike into the basin on a Friday afternoon, set up a base camp, and spend the weekend meticulously patrolling the area to identify any unusual animal activity or signs of human trespass. Leah's radio was equipped with a digital recorder that automatically logged all communications for safety and training purposes. This recording system would later become the sole piece of evidence documenting the events that unfolded during her 3 days in Whispering Creek Basin. What follows are the exact transcripts of her radio transmissions, interspersed with notes from the park dispatch log. Friday, October 13th, 2023, Warden Donovan to base. This is Warden Donovan. I'm approaching the trailhead for Whispering Creek Basin. Conditions are clear. The temperature is around 68 degrees. I'm carrying a full pack for a 3-day patrol. I estimate my arrival at the base camp location at 1600 hours. Warden Donovan to base. Base, Donovan here. I've set up my base camp at grid coordinates 43.1873 north, 72.8891 west. The basin is unusually quiet. No sounds from birds and very few insects. It could be seasonal, but it's not typical for this time of year. I'm beginning my initial patrol of the area now. Warden Donovan to base. This is Donovan. I've completed my first patrol sweep of the basin. No signs of any unusual animal activity or human interference. I found several deer tracks and some scat, but nothing out of the ordinary. I did notice, however, that the wildlife seems to be avoiding the deeper sections of the basin. All the tracks I found were along the edges near the main trail. I'll investigate further tomorrow. Saturday, October 14th, 2023. Warden Donovan to base. Base, Donovan checking in. I had a quiet night, though I did hear some sounds around 3:00 a.m. that I couldn't identify. They sounded like vocalizations, but not from any animal I know. It could have been the wind echoing off the rock formations. I'm starting an extended patrol of the interior sections of the basin now. Warden Donovan to base. Base, this is Donovan. I'm about 2 miles into the basin, following the creek bed. I've found something odd. There's a perfect circle of trees here, all the same kind, arranged in an impossibly precise ring. The trees are very old, perhaps 2 centuries or more, but their alignment is too perfect to be natural. The ground inside the circle is completely barren. No plants, no leaves, nothing. The soil looks like it's been recently disturbed, but I can't determine what by. Warden Donovan to base. Base, Donovan here. I've been examining the tree circle for a few hours. I found several things buried in the soil. Old camping gear, scraps of clothing, what look like personal effects. Some of it appears to be decades old, while some looks more recent. I'm going to collect some samples and continue my investigation. The area has an unsettling feeling to it, hard to describe. I'll give a more detailed report this evening. Warden Donovan to base. Base, this is Donovan. Something isn't right here. I returned to my base camp about an hour ago and discovered my equipment had been moved. My food containers were opened and emptied, but not by animals. The work was too meticulous, too deliberate. My tent was repositioned but not damaged. Someone or something went through my camp while I was gone. I'm going to stay on the radio all night and will request backup if necessary. Sunday, October 15th, 2023, Warden Donovan to base. Base, Donovan here. I need immediate backup. There are thought. He sounds all around my position. Not animal sounds. They sound like voices, but they're distorted. Multiple voices coming from different directions. They seem to be talking to each other. I can see movement in the trees surrounding my camp. Large shapes, too big to be a deer or a bear. I'm requesting immediate assistance. Base to Warden Donovan. Donovan, this is Base. We're dispatching a team to your location. Estimated arrival is 0500 hours. Stay put and stay on the radio. Can you describe what you're seeing? Warden Donovan to base. Base. The shapes are getting closer. They're moving through the trees, but not like animals. They seem to be flowing. That's the only way I can describe it. And the voices are getting louder. They're not speaking any language I recognize, but it sounds like they're discussing something, maybe negotiating. Warden Donovan to base. Base. They're at the edge of my camp now. I can see them clearly. They're tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet, but incredibly thin. Their limbs are unnaturally long, with joints in the wrong places. They're encircling my position, but they haven't approached directly. It's like they're waiting for something. Warden Donovan to base. Base. One of them is approaching my tent. It's making gestures with its arms, pointing toward the tree circle I found earlier. I think they want me to go there. The voices have stopped. They're all just standing there, watching me, waiting. Warden Donovan to base. Base. I'm gonna try to move toward the main trail. They're not blocking that direction. Maybe I can reach the backup team before. Wait. The one nearest to me just moved. It's positioned itself between me and the trail exit. They don't want me to leave. Warden Donovan to base. Base. They're communicating again. The sounds are coming from them directly now, not from the forest. It's like they're singing, but the harmonies don't make sense. There are too many voices for the number of figures I can see. And base, the temperature just dropped dramatically. I can see my breath. It was 60 degrees when I made camp. Warden Donovan to base. Base, they're moving again. All of them at the same time, in the same direction, toward the tree circle. They're gesturing for me to follow. I don't think I have a choice. They aren't directly threatening me, but they're making it clear I need to go with them. Warden Donovan to base. Base, I'm following them to the tree circle. I don't know what else to do. The backup team needs to know this isn't a normal search and rescue situation. These are not animals, and they're not human. They seem to have intelligence, a purpose. They're leading me somewhere specific. Warden Donovan to base. Base, we've reached the tree circle. They've arranged themselves around the perimeter, all facing inward. There's something in the center now, something that wasn't there before. It looks like an opening in the ground, not a cave, not a hole, an opening. The edges are too smooth, too perfect. They're indicating that I should approach it. Warden Donovan to base. Base, I can see down into the opening now. There's light coming from below, but it's not electric. Something else, and I can hear sounds from down there. Voices, but human voices this time. People talking, but I can't make out the words. Base, I think there are people down there, people who have been missing. Warden Donovan to base. Base, they want me to go down into the opening. I can see what looks like steps carved into the sides leading down. The voices from below are getting louder. Someone down there is calling for help. I have to go. Oh, help them. It's my job. Warden Donovan to base. Base, I'm going down. If you don't hear from me again, tell my family I was doing my job. Tell them I found something in Whispering Creek Basin that explains all the missing hikers over the years. Tell them Transmission cuts out. The rescue team arrived at Leah's campsite at 5:15 a.m. on Sunday morning. They found her equipment scattered around the site, but there was no sign of Leah herself. A thorough search of Whispering Creek Basin yielded no evidence of the tree circle she had described, no opening in the ground, and no explanation for her disappearance. The official department report concluded that Warden Leah Donovan had experienced a severe psychological breakdown during her solo patrol and had wandered off into the wilderness in a disoriented state. The bizarre radio transmissions were attributed to stress-induced hallucinations. However, the search teams found one piece of evidence that was never included in the official file. Leah's radio, discovered nearly a mile from her campsite, continued to record for several hours after her final transmission. The additional audio contained only static and silence, save for a single, brief moment at 6:33 a.m. For exactly 30 seconds, the radio picked up what sounded like Leah's voice, calling for help from somewhere deep underground. Warden Leah Donovan was never found. The northwestern section of Green Mountain National Forest was quietly closed to the public, and no park wardens have been assigned to patrol Whispering Creek Basin since October of 2023.